Bob Carey this morning as well, who is as I was teasing him that he is a plant doctor, but he says there is a plant doctor already. So I said, well, maybe you're a DO and he's an MD. Bob Carey, arborist, tree expert, all-around vegetative expert. What's going on?
Good morning. Well, last year about this time, we were over at the Garden Expo when we did a program together called "I'm Calling the Cops on Your Tree."
I remember.
So one of the things that one of the things that's a big agitation in our world is these calls that we get because trees are reaching over on people's properties and all this sort of thing. And more importantly, and actually more difficult, are the situations where somebody's tree has been injured or removed inadvertently, and they want me to come out and tell them how much that tree is worth. So one of the things I just wanted to throw out there this morning is that unlike when you wreck your auto, there's no blue book for your tree. And I can't tell you how many times I've been called out to look at trees that actually aren't there. So, you came over, cleared a few trees off the property because you thought they were on your property. And now I'm supposed to give you a value for those trees because the insurance company wants to know something or whatever. So it's a sore topic with me because unlike you, maybe I'm the kind of guy who tries to solve problems. And as soon as I walk away, I know that there's going to be agitated parties on both sides.
Well, first of all, if somebody wants to join in our conversation, it's 1-800-734-2132. And as you guys know, that's the one-call line, I call it. So if you call that line, 1-800-734-2132, you get this show on Saturday mornings. If you call it any other time, you'll get our voicemail, or you'll get the office live if we're open, which will be Monday through Friday. So you want to join in the conversation, 1-800-734-2132. It's interesting, though, what you're talking about, because let's talk about that. You said there's no blue book for trees, right? Well, in court, the plaintiff, the person who's seeking redress, the guy who's the plaintiff is the guy who wants the money or wants to be made whole. The defendant's the guy who's being told he's responsible. But if you think about the legal system, somebody's coming in asking for relief. Well, the rules are pretty simple. The plaintiff has to prove their case. So with the blue book, for instance, I was in divorce court the other day, and we look up the blue book value of the truck, and there was a little bit of a scuffle because my client said it was worth $18,000. The other side said it was worth $12,000. Well, my client had the wrong year. I don't think that made the $6,000 difference. There's a 1-year difference in the model. It might have been closer, but they both had a good point. She thought he was low, and he thought she was wrong on the year. I think it was somewhere in between, but we can ascertain it because once we know the correct year and the mileage, we can still make some guesses because there's still a little fudging with the blue book. What's the condition?
Yeah, they give you a range. It's not, it's not. It's a range, the condition and things like that. And interestingly, in our business, when you're appraising the value of a tree, and confusingly, there's at least 4 different systems to do that. Kind of 4 paradigms that you can kind of plug numbers into and come up with a number. And
so the court will accept a blue book value pretty handily and accept the ranges and just take a little testimony on deciding where in the range it is. And I suspect a lot of judges just do the Solomon thing and cut it in the middle. But with the tree, of course, the judge looks at me and says, well, Mr. Rominger, it's your job to tell me the value of this tree. And then it's like you say, the next overlay is, well, how do you determine the value? Now, that's not unprecedented in court. When we do appraisals on properties, there's 3 methods of appraising property. It's the replacement, the income-driven, or the market price model. And some people, there's the brick-and-mortar method, which is always probably the most expensive if you had to rebuild it literally from scratch up. Then there's the rental value, which sometimes is more than the market values. I know banks and things like that are most interested in what kind of revenue it'll generate because they just want to make sure you're going to pay your debts on the mortgage. They don't really care what you think you can sell it for. Or anybody else thinks you can sell it for. At the end of the day, for appraisal. So we have those tools, but once again, when you get to people's comfort zones, particularly in court, when the judge hasn't seen this kind of case before. But then what you're telling me is it's even worse than that because all those legal overlays, when you show up, reminds me of a mortician friend of mine who said that his job is made very difficult by the fact that people bring photographs of somebody who's been ravaged by disease for the last 10 years from when they were like 45 and says, this is what Dad looked like. And the guy goes, I don't think Dad looked like that when he was alive, let alone within the last 10 years.
Well, one of the things that's interesting that just complicates it, and you can jump in the pool here almost any place on this issue, but one of the things that complicates it is our industry, like you don't want to be the guy who people say kills trees. You don't want to be the tree killer. So we've done a great job of convincing people that trees have value. Okay. Right. And, intuitively, a bigger tree obviously is going to be more valuable than a bunch of little small scraggly trees.
An enchanted tree is probably
an
very
enchanted tree. A whomping willow is really extraordinary. But the case that kind of comes to mind is the most recent in my kind of cranking through this was on a property where folks had a wooded lot. Okay. And the adjacent property owner shaved off inadvertently several trees, and to clear and prepare his lot. Well, the interesting thing was that the homeowner engaged another arborist from Mount Alto, a tree expert from the forestry school, to appraise the trees, and I was called in by the insurance company to do the same. Well, one of the things was that the value, because these were big trees, even though they weren't there, you could tell by the stump that they were fairly substantial. So you were comparing these trees to the ones that were still standing on the property, similar shape, species, and so forth. I called this the mortgage lifter appraisal. If these trees were indeed worth this much, and the folks were awarded that value, they could have paid their mortgage and gone to Disney World. And somehow intuitively, that doesn't quite work. However, if you plug it into the right model, you can come up with these extraordinary values.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes is, like I was saying a minute ago, even with property appraisals, it's sort of like you look at the numbers, and then the court will go, well, which one seems to make the most sense? Because if one looks like an outlier like that, then you sort of might go, that doesn't seem right, because if that were the case, there would be more pricing anomalies in real property. But with trees, I think part of the issue is going to be what you can convince the fact finder. See, anytime you're in a new area, okay, like I did a horse's hoof case one time. So the farrier did a bad job on the, according to my client, and that's according to my vet and according to me, did a bad job on the shoe. Now, the farrier said, no, I did what the vet told me to do, and the horse's hoof got worse, and sometimes horses get worse. More importantly, I did what I was instructed. And you find out that there's no exact science. The vet's saying, create a shoe that looks like this to try to get the foot back this way. And the two of them work together. Well, I didn't know anything about it, so I spent a few hours with the vet learning all about the horse's hoof and the nerviculum and the white and the coffin bone. And we had this little cut open hoof, like you would use in veterinary
school. The visible hoof.
Yes.
Yeah.
And go in there, and I do my spiel with the judge, and I woo him and wow him, and then the poor farrier comes in, who was self-represented at that level, and he did an okay job, but I don't think he had the wow factor. But what he also didn't know to do was to educate the judge. So since I was the guy who was educating the judge from the ground up, I could kind of shape his education, just the way the vet shaped my education. And so when we go to court, a lot of times the lawyers know very little about the underlying subject matter material. What we're supposed to be really good at, theoretically, is getting it right for an hour or three at a time and being prepped and well prepared and move into this new area. And I always joke, we get to learn all kinds of neat stuff, probably forget 3/4 of it later. But there's a few moments in any deposition or court hearing when you're well prepared where your seeming knowledge of the factual information is great as a lawyer. And part of that's because we're professional flim-flam men when it comes to talking. But nonetheless, you've convinced and educate the court. And so the side that wins sometimes, not even the one with the best valuation model or the guy who knows the most about the trees, but the one who convinces the judge they know the most. And that's the interesting question, the battle of the experts is, how do you do that? But on the other hand, a lot of judges have what they call going back to horses, a manure detector, and get pretty good at figuring out, okay, am I really getting a fair shake here from the expert and the lawyer? Are they really giving me what I need to know? And if the judge doesn't think you gave him what he needs to know, rightly or wrongly, you're not going to get what you want.
Well, good. I have a couple of observations about that, but I want to remind folks that you're listening to not Garden Talk, but to Weekend Appointment. I'm Bob Carey, the Garden Talk guy on Sunday mornings. 1-800-734-2132 is the way to get a word in edgewise.
What time are you going to be on tomorrow, by the way?
11:30.
11:30. See, I get up much earlier. I don't know why. Yeah.
Well, because you're out playing with horses, I guess.
That's right.
Hello, Wilbur.
So one of the things, as an arborist, who's certified to give, testimony in court, well, I have to certify every time. But one of the things that I notice, and it's kind of annoying to me, is one of the tactics of the attorneys is to make you look not like the expert that you're purported to be. And depending on how much or how little experience you've had with this, it's really easy to throw you off your game. I can talk very conveniently and convincingly about this if you and I are having a beer, but all of a sudden you're in court, you're sitting by the judge, the attorney's there, kind of in an adversarial position. I'll never forget the instance where I was addressing the judge. I was asked a question, and I would respond to the judge, and the attorney kept going, "Look at me when you answer. Look at me when you answer." Now, I confirm this for me, but I was told that when you're answering questions, you address the court, and in the case of the court, that's the judge.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something that's interesting. There again is another question: who's your judge? Because a lot of judges would appreciate the fact that you turn and talk to them. And in jury trials, really good expert witnesses turn their chair and go between the lawyer and the jury. And frankly, the lawyer on the other side, I don't know who that was, but probably if it were me, I would say, Your Honor, he keeps telling him to look at him when he talks, and I just think it's more helpful he looks at you and call him out on it and see what the judge says. But a lot of judges wouldn't allow that. Some will. So again, that's like the level of gaming, where your courtroom. Some judge, although I have seen some judges say, just address the attorney, but that's probably means because they don't really want to pay attention
because they're doodling with they're doing the crossword puzzles,
right?
Well, and in this instance, again, particularly, this guy was glowering at me. I mean, it was kind of like
he's
short of again trying to throw you off your game.
And we get a lot of experts. Let me explain how this works. We get a lot of experts where you go out and you hire somebody. For the big bucks, who's a well-vetted courtroom expert, okay? And so when you hire them, they're coming in. I had a guy on a criminal trial years ago, and this is back in 99, 2000. He commanded $7,000 to appear at a trial, okay? And that also included flying him in from Harvard and getting a young lady to drive him from the airport to the courtroom. And as soon as his testimony was done, she drove him right back to the airport, okay?
Wish I knew then what I know now. Jeez.
Yeah. And so he was very expensive. He also, however, looked like a movie star, talked like a scientist, but then and so what he did was very interesting. He would look at the lawyer and give the science answer, and then he would turn to the jury and give the
lay answer
explanation and say, what I was really trying to get at there was, and then had the credentials of, and my favorite part was at some point the other doctor from the Commonwealth said something, and my expert says, well, I understand he's relying on such and such textbook, as you know from his testimony. I actually edited that textbook, and let me tell you why he doesn't really know what he's talking about. And so you have got that guy. Now, you're not going to push him off, but a lot of experts either are people who are really working in the field, okay, working a lot in whatever field they do, and they're not in courtroom a lot, so they're not used to testimony, they're not used to cross-examination, they just have to practice in there. And frankly, sometimes we suspect that they may know even more about the subject matter because they actually work with it day to day, where some experts become wholly owned courtroom people, But that said, as a lawyer, you go, okay, this gal's over from Hershey. She's never really testified in a trial before. She feels a strong sense of loyalty towards her person who was hurt in the auto wreck. But that's not going to help her because she's going to get a little defensive when she should just say, yeah, that's possible, but. And so you get the right sense, and this is where the cross-examination skill comes in. You get the right sense that this person might get a little flustered or take it personally if you attack their person they think they're advocating for, and they lose it in the courtroom a little bit if you push them. Other people, not so much. And so the thing with the lawyering is, I got to figure that out. And in front of a judge, sometimes what you're trying to do is just push the person and just get them angry or just get them upset or get them a little off their game so that they don't come across as convincing. I just read this.
So I've been on jury duty 12 times in my life, in my adult life. So I have a question about that. 1-800-734-2132. This is weekend appointment.
If you were on a jury duty 12 times, was that 12 on the same jury? Were you jury of one, or was that
No.
12 separate occasions?
12 different instances over the past 30 years.
I like how you do my phone number better than I do.
That's because I have it written down. I don't have to.
It rolls off the tongue, as we were saying
earlier. Plus, I say it more slowly so folks who are driving along can write it down.
That's true. It's 1-800, that's 800. And I have to say 00 because if you say 00.
You know the 00 thing, right?
I have a guy that listens to the show, and he gets very upset if I say 00 because my alphanumerics are wrong. 1-800-734-2132. Now, to tell me, really, because being on jury 12 times, and I know you're old.
Foreman of the jury every time too. That's another story.
You're not 23, okay? And I don't mean it in a bad way. But my point on that is, you still. But I get people all the time. I have 110-year-old people come up to me and go, Mr. Ominger, how do I get on a jury before I die? It's the one thing I want to do, and I've never been. Most people have been on 0. So you're statistical.
Well,
anomaly.
I think one of the things is by serving, somehow you get called back. I mean, you're not on the difficult list. So it's been here in Cumberland County and Philadelphia County, split pretty evenly.
So what are your observations?
Well, one of the things. So we were talking about tripping up the testimony, and so you invariably, if you get a expert witness, it's almost obligatory to ask the witness, are you not being paid a substantial amount of money to appear here before the court? And the intention, of course, is to put in the mind of the jury that this is this is a spending game,
bought and paid for.
Yeah. So but as a juror, and certainly the first time I did this, I was in my 20s. It was kind of all new to me. But eventually, some of these tactics become pretty opaque. You come to expect them, and eventually, it just gets me ticked off at the lawyer rather than at the and I agree with that, but I'll tell you something. It's interesting because, we always like to joke, never ask the court reporter or the sheriff, how the trial is going. There's a sheriff in every courtroom and a court reporter in every court, and they hear all these cases. But their view of it is so different because they've heard so much testimony over the years, and they've heard so many lawyers, and of course they know the shticks for various lawyers. In fact, I find, like with jury trials, I sometimes know various ADAs or other attorneys who are going to be involved in the case, and I can kind of 82% guarantee what they're going to say during their closing because they recycle the same stuff. But for the jurors... If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right. But for the jurors, for some of them, and so it reminds me of the stump speech that the politician gives. He gives it 147 times in a month. And for the audience, for most of the people in the audience, it's all new. For the press and the traveling people, they're all like, okay, here we go. I wonder if he'll boff it this time. And so you have a different view. And so that's an interesting question too. How do you know, will it play well the first time or not? And so we would find, and I talked to some jurors, we find some jurors would be really impressed by the fact the person was actually paid a lot of money and think that they must be really smart because they're paid a lot of money. Other people think he's bought and paid for. So I'm not sure you ever really win with those kinds of arguments.
Well, and I don't know if we have to, I have some other stuff I want to ask you. I don't know if you have to break at the bottom of the hour. But one of the other things that I've come to the conclusion when my day in court comes, when I'm on the other side of the docket, so to speak, other side of the jury railing, I and this is not to discourage people from either serving on juries or pursuing legal remedies for stuff, but I would much prefer to leave my fate to the judge rather than to a jury of my peers. Honest, because again, having been the foreman of the jury, and the first time I kind of was the guy who turned around and everybody had stepped back, but in the future I just took it over. Getting 12 jurors to recap what they think they heard is unbelievably difficult. 12 people hear 12. You have to believe they were in a different court.
I years ago, I did a trial, and my theory was the guy had pulled over to go to sleep on the side of the road upon beginning to feel some intoxication. And in those days, it was your intoxication while driving that mattered, not your intoxication within 2 hours of driving, which is the new law. So now it's what your blood alcohol was within 2 hours of the time you drove. Now, back then it was what was it while you were still driving. Mm-hmm. And so my fella had left a friendly tavern that all of us may know, and traveled on 81 some distance. And as he got to the Shippensburg area, decided he wasn't sure if he was tired or the alcohol was getting to him. So he pulled off on the exit ramp and went to sleep. And he had his dome light in his car on, and I thought that was significant because I generally don't have any intention. When I have my dome light on, I don't drive. In other words, because you can't see out the back. And he testified, that he put the dome light on to shuffle some stuff around and then kind of leaned back and closed his eyes and just left it on. And the trooper agreed that the dome light was on when he got to the car. But when I was doing my closing to the jury, and I was like, the dome light was on, this woman started shaking her head vigorously no, like I was, crazy. Well, sure as enough, she comes out as the foreperson, and they convict my guy, and afterwards they swear up and down there was no testimony that the dome light was on. I'm like, but two people said the dome light was on. So I started taking boards, whiteboards, and listing, like I would take the witness up there and have this big white foam board, and I would just handwrite on there some key fact that they said, and I would put my 5 key facts I wanted on that witness out of the board. When we're all done with the cross or the direct, I'd ask the witness to certify the board is true. And is there anything on this board?
Did you ever get objections about that?
Once in a while from a DA, but most of the judges are like, let's let him go. He's probably going to lose anyhow.
So if he has to resort to this, he's already
he's already dead. But what's really neat about that is when you go to do your closing, right, you get to put the board up and you can say for each one of these boards, for these, if I got boards from 5 witnesses. Now, if I have a really bad witness, I have to do a board for them. Imagine that. But I do these boards and I look at the board and I show the jury and I say, so everything on this board was certified true by the witness. Remember, I gave him a chance to correct it, change it, add. I mean, I asked 8 different ways. You were bored. I was bored, but we did it. And here you go. And the reason I started doing that was just to kind of get over, so that at closing I couldn't have some crazy jurors telling me I didn't know what I was talking about.
So as a juror, a foreman of the jury, one of the things I realize when I get back in that room is everybody takes that sort of tactic differently, and some people will just feel like it's the way I perceive that tactic, so to speak, is going to be very different from other folks. Some people are going to appreciate the refresher, the compilation of facts. Other people are just going to think that you think they're stupid. So again, which gets me back around to I'd rather deal with the judge rather than the emotions and temperaments of 12.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. We got John in Lancaster. John, you want to join the conversation?
Yeah, Karl, I had it's still about the court thing, but with this Justin Bieber, what is it like in the court when somebody like Roy Black, who's a celebrated attorney, comes in? Is there a different tenure to the court?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, obviously, everywhere I go, the court just is a Twitter if I come walking in. Now, but so I wouldn't know. No, but I actually joke about that. Like, yeah, okay, let's explain that. So there's a really famous local criminal defense attorney, Bill Kostopoulos, right? And he got Charlie Robinson off down there in York. He got the made-for-TV. He's a great guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy that literally over my career I've called up with questions, and he's never too busy. So he's a consummate gentleman, a great legal scholar, but amazing courtroom presence. But the joke is, because he's Bill, when he goes into a courtroom, he gets a little more leeway. If he wants to start an argument, the judge will actually listen because this guy, he's kind of famous. He knows what he's talking about.
And he might be included in the book.
Right, yeah. Right. So certain practitioners, because of their aura, get away with more in a courtroom, let's say, and that's not the right way to say it, but they might get a little farther down the road. And like I was saying earlier, getting the judge on your side a lot of times is convincing the judge that you know something. So one of the things is the judge will say, do you have any case law on that, right? And somebody says, well, isn't the judge supposed to know the law? And the answer is, not really. The judge depends on the lawyers. Well, if the judge is a little more enamored of the lawyer or the judge is a little more interested in what the lawyer has to say, they'll give him more time to educate him. And a lot of times educating the lawyer, well, there are cases where keeping the judge like a mushroom is the best thing you can possibly do. But my point is, yeah, they get a little more aura. And then, of course, they come with the press. And anytime the press is in the room, it changes the way things work. Judges who might have been guilty of launching into tirades, for instance, might not because they see, 10 reporters there and they don't want their wife to read in the newspaper that they're as awful in the courtroom as they are at home. They just want her to think that's reserved for her. But my point on that is it does change the way everybody looks. That's why our courts have said, Pennsylvania courts have said, no cameras in the courtroom. And one of their reasons is they think that we lawyers will strut around like peacocks if the cameras are on, but that we'll actually try cases and stop worrying about sound bites if we're in trial. And there's some truth to that. So, yeah, anytime you have a celebrity in the room or anytime you have a famous lawyer in the room, there is some difference to that.
I was taken aback when I was watching, and I said, "Here's Roy Black." Well, I'm like, oh my God.
Now, here's the other thing you need to know. In Florida, all judicial proceedings are open to the public and taped. Okay. And when I was working on my famous case, I was told by the press they love nothing better than Florida for two reasons. One is there's cameras in the courtroom and they just provide a feed. Like if you remember the press, you just plug into the wall and boom, you've got the full feed from the courtroom. So you don't even need to have a big crew down there. You just need to have somebody to process the feed and maybe a talking head. You don't have to put in a lot of fancy equipment. And number two, a lot of the material that goes into court is considered public record in Florida. So unlike up here where a lot of exhibits don't get into the press's hands early, and even if they do, the lawyers and the judges can find clever ways to hide them. So, for instance, when I was involved in my big case, there was a understanding with the court that nobody would move for the admission of any of the exhibits until the trial was over, so that nothing was in the record during the trial, so the press couldn't even argue that they were entitled to look at anything because it was part of the court record. Okay? Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah. Wow.
So Florida, conversely in Florida, like if you have a big trial coming up, a lot of what the DA tends to present in terms of evidence, they have to lodge into the public record, so they all get pictures of the evidence and scans of the documents. So a Florida case becomes the best thing for television, too. It's like a made-for-TV case.
So does this give you more confidence about the judicial system anywhere, caller?
Not in Pennsylvania. Hey, thanks.
Thanks, John.
And, good luck with your new show, Karl.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bye.
1-800-734-2132. So
you beat me to the punch.
But should we take a quick break here? Okay. Yes.
Hi, this is Dave Crown, the new owner of Cartridge World in Carlisle, with our new location at 200 South Spring Garden Street at Castles Commons, across from Giant. My business is to help your business save 20 to 40%. I offer free delivery to qualified businesses, and I strive for 100% customer satisfaction. If your business uses printing ink, I'm the business you should call at 249-8900. Stop by our new location, open Monday through Saturday, in the Castles Commons Shopping Center across from Giant. Call Cartridge World at 249-8900.
You know, 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered by water. The rest grows plants. Hi, I'm Bob Carey, host of Garden Talk. Every Sunday, I'll explore the all-encompassing world of plants, whether they're in your garden, along the highway, or someplace a little unexpected. Learning about plants is uplifting, entertaining, and sometimes almost unbelievable. So tell your friends, tell your grandma, and yes, tell the kids that Garden Talk is on every Sunday from 11:30 to 12:30, right here on Country Gold Radio.
Sure fresh, sure friendly, doing our best to give you more. We're your neighborhood Surefine stores.
The Super Sunday stock-up sale is on at your Nell's Market Fresh Foods in Enola, Hanover, East Berlin, Spry, New Oxford, and Carlisle on the Walnut Bottom Road. Save over $5 a pound on fresh-cut New York strip steaks. Save $11 a pound on Red King crab legs. And save $11 a box on 5-pound boxes of Icelandic haddock fillets. Today's the final day of the sale, so stock up for the big game with great Gold Card savings. Pork chops or country ribs are only $1.99 a pound. 5 pounds of marinated chicken wings, only $9.99. And Easy Peel 31 to 40 count shrimp, only $6.99 a pound. Go to WIOO.com, click the Nell's banner, and see more great Gold Card savings during the 3-day Super Sunday stock-up sale. Only at your locally owned Nell's. And as always, thank you for shopping Nell's.
Doing our best to give you more. We're your neighborhood Surefine Stores.
Hi, this is Ed Belden for your Good Neighbor Pharmacies, Big Spring, Holly, and Quality Care. Did you know that a recent survey of Consumer Report readers, 94% were highly satisfied with independent pharmacies? They also praised the pharmacists for accessibility and personal service. If you can't come to us, utilize our free prescription delivery. We have drive-up window service at Quality Care in Big Spring for your convenience. Quality Care is your local compounding pharmacy for you and your pets. Be sure to check with us before you mail away your prescriptions. You can order prescription refills 24 hours a day by phone or online. We are Holly Pharmacy in Mount Holly Springs, Quality Care Pharmacy in Carlisle, and Big Spring Pharmacy in Newville. Remember, you are our most important customer.
We truly care for you and your family. We believe in our community. We're Good Neighbor Pharmacy.
Country Gold Roots time. It's 8:40. We are at 17 degrees. It's time now to return to Weekend Appointment with attorney live in the studio, Karl Rominger.
Hey, good morning. I've got Bob Carey here. We're talking about all kinds of things involving trees, courts, laws, but you know, I actually put a stat up on Facebook the other day, and I'll read it here. Some criminologists found that by age 18, 30% of black men, 26% of Hispanics, and 22% of white men have been arrested. By 23, it's 49%, 44%, and 38%, meaning that by the age of 23, more than a third of the males in the population have actually been arrested, and we don't mean just a parking or traffic ticket. And among women at that age, it's just around 20% or a little lower. But meaning 1 out of 5 women has been arrested by the age of 23, and 1 out of 3 men has been arrested by the age of 23. And somebody said to me in their response, that's impossible. I don't know that many people have been arrested. And I'm like, it's because you're not living in the wide, wide world where everybody else is. But there's a lot of repercussions when a third of your population, male population, a fifth of your female population, have been arrested for serious criminal charges. Now, some of those people are acquitted, but as you know, the conviction rate's probably 80%. How does that affect you?
Well, that's kind of interesting because there's two issues there. What is it that many people can get snagged on, as a serious crime? But, in my world, if you could do something differently, you might, but a lot of folks who have criminal records end up in the landscape industry. But one of the challenges is, certainly as a person who may have a felony, how do you go about, applying for a job? And as an employer, right, what risks or liabilities do you shoulder if you're deploying somebody with a felony on somebody's property?
Yeah, and those are realistic problems. The classic stories are you hire the delivery guy, and it turns out he's a serial rapist or something, and then he goes in and acts in conformity with his nature, and you didn't do a background check on him, and why are you sending him to women's houses to make deliveries in the middle of the day? And those things do become real legal liabilities. On the other hand, the EEOC is currently litigating or looking at pushing against businesses for not discriminating because, as I told you, those rates being that if you have a policy that simply says if you have a felony we can't hire you, that disproportionately affects blacks rather than whites, and disproportionate impact without good cause. You can have disproportionate impact if you can show, but what they've been saying is that this idea that if someone has a felony you can't hire them. Well, what was the felony for, and where is it in time? Mm-hmm. So you can certainly make an argument that anybody who's got a felony pending or had one in the last year, for instance, we're just not going to hire you because we don't know what's going on with you. But they've sort of suggested, and courts are starting to suggest that, hey, if somebody had a felony 28 years ago and has done nothing since, and the felony isn't completely heinous or directly applicable to the job at hand, then why are you even looking at it? But that puts the employer on the horns of the dilemma, because is he going to be sued for discrimination by the potential employee, or is he going to be hammered by the victim of the crime later for hiring this person? And the criminal code itself sort of says that the criminal background checks in Pennsylvania, that you can't use that information. You're not supposed to use prior criminal record for just any willy-nilly purpose. You are supposed to focus it down. That's our law.
But many employment applications have a specific question: have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Oh, yeah.
And the whole 28-year thing, I think most people could say, yeah, 28 years ago, if you've been clean. But, if you're unable to secure employment a year after you've been convicted for the felony, seems to me that you're not going to be able to stay out of trouble for 28 years.
Well, and here's the other problem with that, which is, because in year one, let's assume you are staying law abiding, right? But in year one, you can't get the job you want. In year two, you can't get the job you want. Now you're 10 years without the skill set or the practice. And so when you do, now your felony is 10 years old, and somebody says, well, we would hire a guy with a 10-year-old felony. But do you have any experience?
Right. Right. It's
a terrible cycle, and in fact, it's actually reaching a critical mass. Because here's what used to happen. What used to happen is people with criminal records could just move to the next town, okay, or literally just pick up and go across the country. And there were tons and tons of employers, even bigger, sophisticated employers, who didn't vet everybody mechanically. Nowadays, between Google with your friends looking you up and Google with your employer looking you up and their wide databasing of criminal records, it's impossible to sort of leave your past behind. So, the old story was, I did something really bad, but then I snuck away to another state. I did my time. I went to the other state. I caught a job. They realized I was an okay guy and I was talented. And, it was 5 years till somebody figured out that I was the same guy that did this other thing. But they were like, no, we know you. You're okay. That doesn't happen anymore.
Right. Well, and this is a good opportunity to segue into just a little commercial for you on my behalf, is that you do for businesses. There's all kinds of business services that you provide, and certainly one of the things in our industry is how to design contracts with folks, how to collect on bad receivables, things like that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Well,
yeah, contracts are interesting. In fact, I have a buddy of mine who's got a company, and he says, I want you to look at the language I have in this contract for my non-compete. And I'm like, well, my first question was, where did you get it from? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I think I just looked at some old contracts years ago and cobbled it together. He goes, I don't even know if it's from this state or not. And I said, I'm betting, because he's a sophisticated business guy. A lot of times I see people put contracts together and they're pretty good. What they're missing a lot of times is just those little tweaks. And I'll give you an example. He does business all over the place and has customers in other states and vendors in other states that'll sign whatever contract he puts in front of them because they want to do business. So it's not going to be a business issue. I do warn people sometimes, if you have a 100-page contract, you'll probably get less people to sign it than a one-page contract. But somewhere in between, most people still sign it, but you'll have a little more protection in it. And I said, you ever notice that when you sign other people's contracts, it usually includes a clause, if you're reading them, by the way, that says you've got to sue them in Kansas City, Missouri, or you've got to sue them in Chicago, Illinois. And if you look mysteriously, that's like where their company is. It's called the forum selection clause. So your contract should always have the forum selection as Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, if that's where your office is. And actually, although one time my brother needed a contract years ago, and he lives in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, and he was doing all his business up there, but we cleverly put in the contract that if you want to sue him, you have to come to Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. That way his brother could represent him pro bono, but not have to travel. Then we have a choice of law selection clause we can put in there. Well, okay, so big deal. We're going to Cumberland County, but all the business and everything's going on in Texas, and all the agreements were struck in Texas. So the other guy says, I want Texas law. Well, that sort of then means it's problematic for everybody. But more importantly, they might choose to push for Texas law when it's favorable to them. So why not just throw a clause in there that says this will proceed under Pennsylvania law for all purposes? That way, it's in your hometown, in your state's under your state's law, and the other guy's got to come to you. And so when there's only $10,000 on the line and they're mad and they're suing you, it's more expensive for them to come up from whatever state they're in. Those are just little tweaks that can go into contracts that aren't obvious because they're not things that come up often.
So the reason I bring this up is there's lots of folks who have lost their job at whatever and decide to get into the landscape business, hardscape business, whatever it happens to be, small businesses. It's certainly worth their while to come and let you run through some of their paperwork.
I got a guy coming to see me right now on a contractor problem. And when I say contractor problem, there's a statute in place, right, that says that the contractors have to have a number, and they have to use their number when they advertise, and they have to have a contract, and in their written contract, it has to have an 800 number to the Attorney General's office, and it has to have some other disclaimer language, and blah, 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 blah. If you don't put it in there, your contract is not enforceable. And
who knew?
Who knew, right.
Yeah.
so, I've got a guy, he goes out and starts contracting around. He got the contractor number. He did most everything he's supposed to do. And then he goes over and some guy says, I'll give you $5,000 to put this stone wall or whatever it was in for him, which sounds kind of like landscaping work to me almost. Guy gives him like $2,000 down, which I'll bet covers the cost of the stone. And he finishes it off, and the guy goes, I'm not happy with it. I'm not paying you. He goes to sue him in district justice court, and lo and behold, discovers he's giving the other guy a free wall. Now, it's not quite that simple because the courts didn't quite like that remedy. And we found that the courts, as of right now, are saying no contract action, but you might still be able to sue for unjust enrichment. So there is some loopholes to push through, and I'm on the other side of that because I have some homeowners who we've successfully dismissed a contract claim by contractor, and in that case, that was a large company. I mean, a really large contracting company that somehow had a whole series of contracts still floating around, probably in the bottom of the desk drawer somewhere, that didn't have all the right language in them after the amendment, and therefore they had an unenforceable contract. And of course, when the dispute arose, my client and I decided that since they didn't want to flex, we wouldn't flex, but we had a really big legal muscle that we could use to bop their contract action right out of court.
And the reason I mention all this is because most of us who are practitioners, in small businesses are really good at what we do. So if you're good at pruning trees or laying brick and stuff, but we're not good at this other stuff. And my thought is that minimally ought to have your, magnet or coaster on your counter, or somebody like a Robbinger and Associates.
And I don't disagree with that because, like when I got my brother, I was like, use my brother as an example. He yelled at me because I went to Jiffy Lube, He's like, you change your own oil, it's so much cheaper, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, first of all, you own a junkyard, or as he calls it, a scrapyard. And so you
it's a recycling facility.
Right, recycling facility. And it is pretty neat because my brother's a little retentive, if you know what I mean. But he's equipped. Like on any given day, he can crawl under a car, and it's not going to affect. I have to take my suit off and change into something else, right? And then I need something to elevate the car on, and I'm told I need some kind of special wrench to get the oil filter off. And blah, blah, blah. When I'm done, I might save $8, but it'll take me 4 hours. And so, as a specialization issue, I always tell people, I don't change my own oil not because I can't, because I could certainly figure it out, and I could certainly go get all the right tools. And probably the third or fifth time I did it, it would be really snappy and I would be right. But maybe the first 2 times I would do it, I would screw it up.
So, yeah, good analogy for why having a specialist or an expert in your corner is a good thing to do. I want to leave you with, we have a few minutes left, but I want to leave you with a little story that may be fodder for future shows. So, I've been in this business a long time. As you pointed out, I'm not 23 years old, but way back in the early 80s, I was down in Millersville University. We had a program that still runs down there. It's called Native Plants in the Landscape. So, during the bull sessions, I get to talk to some of these guys who are a little bit older than me. And, hearing their stories, and I say, so how did you get into growing plants in the nursery? And some of them have turned into substantial operations. And, they feel free to tell us, share with us that they developed their plant expertise growing pot in their dorm room.
Right.
So I thought that was a funny story that these nursery guys that you're buying from, grew pot, and that's where they kind of tweak their growing expertise. What's interesting to me is that all these years on, we may be coming full circle, is that some of these guys may be, but it also gets to a little bit that's, a lot of these felons that are unhirable may be exactly the guys these are after if they're, because that's what they got pinged for.
And there is a certain, what do I want to say? I have clients say to me routinely on the marijuana cases, like, they're really going to take my driver's license. They're really putting me in jail. They're really doing this to me. It's legal in so many states now, and this is ridiculous. And it's sort of like you have to say, like, well, yes, it's illegal, and it's really bad because that's the law, but it's now more like speeding. And what's interesting, there's some reflection of that even going back a couple of years. I was in Fulton County, and the district attorney down there, who's retired now, so I feel free saying this, had said, it's just marijuana, so I'm not going to put him in state prison. I'm saving that space for the hard drugs. And that was kind of his joke. But my guy was still in trouble. but he wasn't going to treat it the same way because it's hard. It's hard to.
Is that a discretionary thing?
Yeah.
Still. I mean, with mandatory sentencing
the mandatory is controlled by the district attorney.
Okay.
And so, like right here in the area right now, they're having a huge heroin problem in the Cumberland County right now, and they're trying to work their discretion to identify who the real dealers are. Okay, and pound them. But then identify who the real addicts are and try to work with drug court and other rehabilitation type techniques with them. Because heroin's one of these weird ones where a lot of the users do sell it because they can't afford it, and you can't work on it. See, this is one of the things about marijuana is a lot of people can be a functioning pothead, right? They can be an occasional marijuana smoker. They can even be a hopeless marijuana smoker, but they can still show up for work just like functioning alcoholics do. Mm-hmm. People are on heroin. There's not too many functioning heroin addicts. So as a result, once they're addicted, they become thieves, and there's a lot of problems. But a lot of them aren't really, they're not drug dealers. They go to Philadelphia and buy 20 packets, come back up and sell 10 to a friend to support the next 20 they're going to go buy. Mm-hmm. So the district attorneys and law enforcement is working very hard to try to identify that. And so that's a discretionary aspect because every one of those people is technically a dealer and technically you could do this to them. But morally, the DAs and the police look at it and say, let's figure out who the users are. And so, there is a lot of discretion that goes into it. Now, marijuana is coming around. I mean, the president just came out, right, and said it's probably less dangerous than alcohol.
Right.
Which caused a big conniption amongst a lot of the proletariat. But I understand, who's the last president who didn't do drugs, by the way? Let's think about this. Clinton admitted to marijuana.
Warren G. Harding.
Yeah, you think that was probably? Yeah, no. I mean, we can go all the way back to Bush Jr.
And actually, if you go back before that, and this is the other thing is stuff that is not legal now, was legal then. So some of the early presidents may have been using cocaine or things like that.
Well, they were just taking Uncle Leonard's snake oil sauce
for arthritis, the last cure you ever need.
Yeah, and that's. But seriously, the last at least the last Bush and Obama, I think, have both admitted to cocaine use. Clinton had never really admitted to drug use per se. He was just very clever about it. We all know he was admitting, but he never admitted anything harder than that. He had his other addictions.
Well, I never used drugs.
Well, Ronald Reagan probably not, except maybe about a lot of.
He's old enough to when Coca-Cola really had cocaine
in it, right? Yeah. And he was a big nicotine guy, but cigarettes used to be. And I wish to God I could smoke a cigar in the courthouse. By the way, I got to mention Harrisburg Beer and Cigar. They have a beautiful walk-in humidor. Have you been over there?
I haven't.
You're probably not a big cigar smoker.
I'm not.
Yeah, but they have a massive collection of stuff. Now they aren't related to, but there is some connection with Carlisle Beer and Cigar, and locally, they can get anything. I just like going over to the Harrisburg location because there's a group of guys that hangs out in the lounge over there. But I always keep thinking, I watched Cape Fear, and the bad guys and the good guys, but the bad guy, he's walking around the courthouse smoking a cigar, talking to the counselor, and teasing him about what bad things are going to happen to his kids or something. And I'm thinking, man, I would love to try a case and smoke a cigar.
And would that actually be permissible in some venues, in some jurisdictions?
It is not anymore, but in the 1950s, they were all ash in the ashtrays and smoking at the tables. And
right, cool. Hey, 1-800-734-2132 is always the way to get a word in edgewise on the weekend appointment show here on Saturdays. That's the number to your office.
Right.
For my colleagues out there who are in the green industry, Karl Rominger is a good name to have on your refrigerator magnet.
I appreciate it. By the way, what time is your show on again tomorrow?
It's still 11:30. It's only been on for 6 years, man.
I know. I like to tease only because I was like 11:30.
Yeah, when you're supposed to be in church. Listen, I'm not, I'm not convincing myself
we'll
that it's anything other than it was. And I'll remind you, you've been on sitting in the chair where I've been. So somehow you figured out to be here at 11:30.
Yeah, I did do it. I did do it once.
Yeah.
My joke about this time slot is that I have to decide every Friday night, do I go to bed or do I just stay up?
Well, I see you have the Geritol bottle right beside you. Yeah, holy smokes.
Well, you can tell I'm still in my pajamas.
When does the burning the candle at the both ends begin to take its toll?
I'm told sometime in your 50s, so I'm hoping.
It's true.
All right, where are we at there, Mr. Producer Man?
We have 30 seconds.
That's 30 seconds. All right. Well, hey, if you want to know a little bit more about us, go to romingerlaw.com, ROMINGERLAW.com. And, of course, you can get all the podcasts. We've got hundreds of hours of past shows up on there, so a little archive. And I also do my little Karl's commentary now where I just sort of say random things in the middle of the night into a cell phone that goes up there. So I'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, everyone.